The war on drugs has been an utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws. But I'm not somebody who believes in legalization of marijuana. What I do believe is that we need to rethink how we are operating in the drug wars, and I think that currently we are not doing a good job.
Why do you support the decriminalization of marijuana?
Why support the criminalization of marijuana is the better question. I mean, this is a substance that grows in a natural way, and some people use it for different reasons. In a free country, you ought to have the right to do that. And another good reason is the war on drugs is a total failure, and it's created a monster of a problem for us, and we spend hundreds of billions of dollars. Prohibition is absurd.
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Mackenzie Allen. I'm a retired law enforcement officer and member of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. The so-called war on drugs has been waged for 40 years at a cost of $1 trillion and thousands of lives, with nothing to show for it but increased supplies, cheaper drugs, and a dramatic increase in violence associated with the underworld drug market. Sir, do you think there will or should come a time for us to discuss the possibility of legalization, regulation, and control of all drugs, thereby doing away with the violent criminal market as well as a major source of funding for international terrorism? Thank you so much for your time, Mr. President.
Well, I think this is an entirely legitimate topic for debate. I am not in favor of legalization. I am a strong believer that we have to think more about drugs as a public health problem. When you think about other damaging activities in our society, smoking, drunk driving, making sure you're wearing seatbelts. Typically, we've made huge strides over the last 20, 30 years by changing people's attitudes. And on drugs, I think that a lot of times we have been so focused on arrests, incarceration, interdiction, that we don't spend as much time thinking about how do we shrink demand. And this is something that, within the White House, we are looking at very carefully.
Do you care about sick people using marijuana? I mean, have you come out for that?
The answer is no. I say that there was one question that was voted on that ranked fairly high, and that was whether legalizing marijuana would improve the economy and job creation. And I don't know what this says about the online audience, but I just want, I don't want people to think that this was a fairly popular question. We want to make sure that it was answered. The answer is no, I don't think that is a good strategy to grow our economy. So,
Groups. We don't get our rights because we're gays or women or minorities. We get our rights from our Creator as individuals. So every individual should be treated the same way. A system designed to protect individual liberty will have no punishments for any group and no privileges. Today, I think inner city folks and minorities are punished unfairly in the war on drugs. For instance, blacks make up 14% of those who use drugs, yet 36% of those arrested are blacks, and it ends up that 63% of those who finally end up in prison are blacks. This has to change. We don't have to have more courts and more prisons. We need to repeal the whole war on drugs. It isn't working. We have already spent over $400 billion since the early 70s, and it's a wasted money. Prohibition didn't work. Prohibition on drugs doesn't work. So we need to come to our senses, and absolutely, it's a disease. We don't treat alcoholics like this. This is a disease, and we should orient ourselves to this. That is one way you could have equal justice under the law.
Thank you, Congressman.
Okay, Stephen Baldwin, hi. You're against legalizing marijuana. Why?
Well, it's a little bit ironic. I could see why Jimmy wanted to rush out of there so quickly. Here you're looking at an actor that has starred in two very popular marijuana films, Half-Baked and Biodome, and here I am bringing a faith-based conservative perspective to this issue. And, obviously, Joy, there's a lot of common sense that needs to be included in this conversation. It's a very simple reality. marijuana leads to doing worse things. That's just a fact. I don't care what anybody says, what the debate is. When you smoke marijuana at a young age, it'll usually lead to alcohol abuse and harder drugs. So right there, I mean, that's one reason why it should not be legalized.
We've heard that for years, that it's a gateway drug. What do you say to that, Congressman Paul?
Well, I think that's silly. Probably the most addictive drug in the country, in the world, is nicotine. And nobody talks about nicotine being a gateway drug. So there's no sense to that. And besides, it's not nearly as addictive as alcohol. So if you're a consistent person and you think the government should be regulating personal behavior, you have to be for prohibition of alcohol. And when you look back and throughout history and what happened to that was a total disaster. It created the Al Capones. And right now today, there is so much violence today, not because people use drugs, but because they're illegal. That's why, you know, the people who benefit the most by all these laws, these are the drug cartels. They lobby to keep these laws in place because they can't exist without them. You don't have the Al Capones now because you don't have prohibition of alcohol. Prohibition is what is bad. And this does not mean we endorse personal behavior that is not beneficial. It just means who regulates personal behavior, and it shouldn't be the state. There's no benefits to it. It's just like regulating church behavior or religious behavior of any sort. So I see no purpose in doing this.
Okay, Stephen, we'll get back to you when we return. Okay, more Baldwin versus Paul.
But I think this is a typical example of trying to fix a problem that we invite upon ourselves. In economics, I adhere to the position that once you want to do good in the economy, and with all the best motivations, we do things and we create new problems, then we have to go back. And if you get 2 new problems for every intervention, then you're constantly writing laws. Well, in social policy, I believe the same thing. It was trying to improve social policy with crack cocaine. There was no malevolence on this. It was designed to help people, especially the minorities that were using crack cocaine over powder cocaine, and they thought this was terrible. And it turned out that it backfired. It actually hurt minorities. It didn't help them. And here we're trying to correct this disparity. And it just, to me, confirms the fact that the government management, whether it's the economy or social policy, doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Okay, we're back. Stephen, let me ask you a question. Congressman Paul brought up the whole idea of medical marijuana. What is your response to that? People have glaucoma, they're nauseous from anti-cancer drugs. What do you say to that?
Well, again, you know, there is, you know, not a whole lot of research to back up the fact that there aren't alternatives even to that. There's lots of pain relieving practices that people can study. So I must say that, to be honest with you, Joy, when in fact there are people for those reasons that do have success with it, then if prescribed under a controlled situation, then yes, obviously that makes a lot of sense. But back to Mr. Paul's statement about, you know, the addictive aspects of smoking cigarettes. Obviously, if I smoke a cigarette, I'm not going to get in my vehicle and be impaired potentially to damage somebody else's life. If we legalize marijuana, there's no question that the number of deaths related to people being impaired under the influence of marijuana is going to increase. The question is, just to be able to tax it, is it worth it? That's the question.
Rob, what do you say to that?
Well, I understand there's a few people who smoke marijuana already. And how many times have you seen somebody arrested for driving under the influence of marijuana? I mean, I've never even heard of it. Driving under the influence of alcohol, that is dangerous. But people shouldn't do that, and they should be responsible. But you can't get more people smoking marijuana. It's just that what is so bad is the war on marijuana, putting people in prison. They can be caught using drugs for the 3rd time, never committing a violent act, and putting them in prison for life. And yet rapists and murderers can get out. And if you think of all that expenses, you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that get spent on this. And people usually who get sent to prison for nonviolent drug use come out as violent criminals. So it makes no sense at all to pursue this method, because marijuana is not going to increase car accidents. Let me tell you, that is not the case.
I would think that it's hard to detect if you're high on marijuana when you're pulled over by the police. There's no breathalyzer test. So how would we know what effect it has?
Well,
that's... Go
ahead, Ron.
Go ahead, Mr. Paul. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, that's a possibility, but even under today's circumstances, nobody gets arrested for it. And the alcohol is the real culprit and the real problem, and yet we have people in Washington, D.C. who drink a lot of alcohol, let me tell you, because of political reasons. They're scared to death to vote to legalize the growing of hemp. Hemp has nothing to do with smoking marijuana. And because of this obsession on the drug war, we can't grow hemp in this country. We send the hemp growing up to Canada, then we buy the products that we make from hemp. So we export our jobs to Canada. Hemp is a good product that we prohibit from being used, and it was legal up until even after World War II. We were allowed to raise hemp in this country. This is how hysterical this war on drugs has gotten. So the sooner we come to this realization, someday, actually I'm optimistic about this. I think this country is going to wake up like they did in the 30s and say, hey, you know, prohibition didn't work. Alcohol's a horror. It's made things worse. It's caused a lot of crime and a lot of violence. It's about time we just do this. Get rid of the prohibition. Let the regulation go back to the state. Regulate it like alcohol. And with the real regulation come from the individual and also from the family and the parents and the community. That's what prevents drug use, not some federal thug coming in with guns and arresting some kid and throwing him in prison for life. That makes no sense whatsoever.
Are you